Hi, everybody. We're kind of letting everybody in now. Teresa may or may not be on the call. She's kind of mid-traveling right now. So if she doesn't end up showing up, I'll go ahead and run the meeting for everybody. So we're just going to take a few minutes just to let everybody know we have a really full house today. So we're not going to do introductions, but if you guys want to put how long you've been a guardian and what part of the state that you work in the chat, please do so that everybody can see where you are and, how long you've been a guardian and all that good stuff. And yep, we're just going to give it a couple minutes to let everybody join. It looks like a couple people are putting their stuff in the chat. Kathy said she works in Southwest Florida and she's been a guardian for 10 years. It looks like Mary's been a guardian for 12 years, serves Polk County, and Betty serves Marion County and has been a guardian for 16 years. So if you guys want to do your introductions in the chat, feel free. Also, because we have such a full house, we got a lot of people on today. So we're going to ask you to please put your questions in the chat as you go. And then at the end of the presentation, we will answer the questions in the chat because some may be covered as we go, but we will circle back to any questions in the chat and answer them. So if you have any questions as we go along, please just put them in the chat and then we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. And I'm going to give it just one more minute and then I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker. And if you're just joining us, we have a full house. So if you guys want to put your introductions in the chat, please feel free. We always love to see where everybody's coming from and who's on today. And like I said, we have a full house. Okay, it looks like everybody's starting to file in. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is Brenda Hager. She's the Senior Regional Director of Special Considerations. Early in her career, Brenda and her business partner established Special Needs Agency to assist families who had a family member with an intellectual or developmental disability. Both of them have family members with special needs. The agency helped families in an estate planning capacity, focusing on the coordination of special needs trusts and wills through affiliated advisors. Over the course of time, the need for funeral expense planning became more evident and the focus shifted to end-of-life planning. In 2010, Special Considerations was formed and is devoted solely to funeral expense planning, especially for those who rely on public benefits. Special Considerations currently serves 48 states. As Senior Regional Director, Brenda works closely with families, guardians, conservators, trustees, and rep payees to ensure those they serve will have a dignified end of life. Thank you for joining us today, Brenda.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Today, we're going to talk about, as you know, preparing for final expenses and what the options are. I'm going to talk about the different types of services and the average cost. And I'm also going to share with you a possible new solution, which is a Special Considerations Burial Trust. And I think, as Julie mentioned, if possible, write your questions down and put them in the chat, and we'll address them at the end. All right, so I put a little agenda together. So the first thing we're going to talk about is final expenses. I'm going to talk about the different types of cremation services and traditional burial, the costs. We're going to discuss crisis planning versus planning ahead. What are all the options? What are the most common options for planning for funerals or for final expenses? And then we're going to talk about the burial trust, the online easy enrollment process, and the most important, we're going to talk about what happens when the time comes. So let's talk about the different options. For cremation, there primarily are two. There's direct cremation. This is a very simple, low-cost option. There's no ceremony or service. The cremated ashes are returned in a basic container. The full-service cremation is when there is a viewing or a visitation, which means now we're also going to have embalming costs as well as cremation. And there may be a funeral reception. It may be a little more involved. For burials, the direct burial is kind of like the direct cremation. Burial occurs shortly after death. There's no funeral service or formal ceremony. Again, it's a very simple, low-cost option. And traditional full-service burial, that's a broad range. It can include a viewing or a visitation, the funeral service itself, even the graveside service, funeral reception, memorial luncheon, that range can go all over the place. So this is kind of interesting. Have any of you used Travelocity? Do you know what Travelocity is? All right, well, there's something called Funeralocity, which I've been using this tool because I find it very helpful. You'll see there at the bottom, I have their website. So Funeralocity is a great place to go to gather some information about final expense costs, funeral costs. If you log into their website and you put your zip code or your city or your state in, you're going to see a whole list of funeral directors come up. But if you scroll to the very bottom, you're going to see the average cost for all these different levels of services specifically for your area. So you might find that helpful. So here I just took the state of Florida and showed the different levels of service there on the left, direct cremation, so on and so forth. And then I have the low, the high, and then the average cost. And underneath that, I also indicated what the national average is, just so you have a feel. So between direct cremation and traditional burial, we've got a range of $484 to almost $14,000. So there's a huge range there. So let's talk about the importance of planning ahead. Crisis planning, none of us want to be there, but sometimes that happens. Oftentimes I get calls from some of my clients, whether they're a trust group or a guardian or a residential provider or even a family. And their family member or the person they serve is on hospice or they have a terminal illness. And now the thought of final expenses has come to mind. And now we're struggling to figure out how we're going to handle that. Or what's even worse in crisis planning is somebody passes away and there's nothing in place. So now we're struggling to figure out how we're going to pay those costs. So pre-planning for sure is the best path. But before I go on to pre-planning, I do want to talk just a little bit about when death is imminent. Like if you have an individual where death is imminent, some funeral homes will accept a check and allow you to hold funds on account for 7 to 10 days. A lot of times there's just no time to do the plan or to get a burial trust in place. So that is an option. So what are the options? We have the funeral home pre-need plan, and that's very common, and it's a great plan. You go to a funeral home, you set up the pre-need plan. One of the things I would say is that make sure they set it up so that it's irrevocable. Some funeral homes are associated with a cemetery or final disposition situation. Some aren't. So you just want to make sure that that's incorporated. Burial bank accounts. Burial bank accounts have been around for 30 to 40 years. They were very popular 30 to 40 years ago. There are revocable burial bank accounts and irrevocable burial bank accounts. They're not as popular anymore. Oftentimes, if I do have a client that has one that we're trying to work with, I contact the bank. They switch me around to 4 or 5 people because nobody knows what I'm talking about when I call into the bank. So more and more people are going away from setting up these irrevocable burial bank accounts for a couple different reasons. Oftentimes they end up having dormant account fees. What happens when the person dies? How are we going to liquidate that account, get those funds to the funeral home? So keep this in the back of your mind. With the burial bank accounts, whether they're revocable or irrevocable, if they're irrevocable, we can roll them into our burial trust, which we're going to talk about, kind of like you'd roll an IRA. So that is something that's possible. Okay, ABLE accounts. With ABLE accounts, you can use the funds in an ABLE account for funeral burial, but it's a little bit like the burial bank account in that, okay, at time of death, we're going to have to liquidate that account. You're probably going to have to get a death certificate. and it may hold up getting those funds to the funeral director. I kind of kiddingly say we all have a 1 out of 1 chance of having to pay for final expenses. So why not secure that now? With my family member, if in her ABLE account, if I had money earmarked for her and I passed away, is the next person going to know that I had money earmarked in her ABLE account? Why not just move that to a funeral home pre-need plan or into something like our burial trust? So we're going to be talking more about the special considerations burial trust. And as you'll see with our burial trust, we're going to help you set it up. If you need letters of documentation or certification for benefits, we can provide those for you. And at time of need, we're going to help facilitate that claims process. So it really, versus the burial bank accounts or the ABLE accounts, it really does save you time and money because you're not having to liquidate those accounts and get all the documents that you need to change those accounts. We're going to take care of everything from the beginning to the end. So it saves time, saves money, gives you some peace of mind, and it's convenient. So the funeral home pre-need, whoops, where'd my mouse go? The funeral home pre-need plan is a good one, and the special considerations burial trust. So with a burial trust, it's irrevocable, it protects the benefits, it's spend down qualified. The enrollment process is super easy. It's a secure online enrollment process. It's Medicaid and SSI compliant, and you can choose any funeral home or cremation provider in any state. So how's it work? It's an accumulation vehicle for funeral, cremation, burial. There are no fees. There's no IRS reporting. The minimum to open is $100. The maximum is $15,000. We can go above that $15,000 limit if there is extenuating circumstances. I had a case where the individual lived in Kansas, but they were going to be buried in California. So we were going to have a service in Kansas, a funeral director's cost in Kansas, transportation expenses across state lines to California, California funeral director, service, burial. So there are some circumstances when we can go above that 15,000. I just saw a question, who is the trustee of the trust? ClearPoint, Federal Bank and Trust, is the trustee of the trust. So if you want to set up a burial trust, what are the common funding sources? Where does the money come from to get it into the burial trust? Oftentimes it's spend downs. It could be ABLE accounts. Just like I talked about earlier, we can move those funds from the ABLE account into the burial trust. Could be from a burial bank account, whether it's revocable or irrevocable. First or third party special needs trust. I think some of you are very familiar with first party trusts. And for those of you who aren't, a first party trust means that it's the individual's money. And the trust basically is like an asset protection trust. One of the things is that when the individual dies that has a first party trust, you can't access those funds, even for funeral burial. So first party trust groups are very proactive in making sure that their trust beneficiaries have something in place for funeral expenses, because they don't want to get that call. What do you mean I can't use the funds in the trust for funeral expenses? So that's another. And third party trust, we have third party trust means that that trust was set up with somebody else's money, mom's, grandma's, or whomever. And of course, the other option is an individual's monthly spending account. As I go through and talk about this, you're going to see that with the burial trust, you can move funds into that trust as often as it makes sense. You can do a lump sum and never put money in there again. You can open it up with $100 and 1 month put $25 in, and next year put $100 in or $1,000 in. So it's super flexible. At time of need, all the claims go through special considerations. We facilitate that claims process. You can report that claim either by phone, through our website, And what we're going to do is we're going to determine what that value is. You're going to tell us who the funeral home is. We're going to communicate that to the funeral home, and those funds will get sent to the funeral home, whichever funeral home or cremation provider you're working with. And anybody in the circle of support can report that death claim because those funds can only be used for that individual. These are examples of authorized expenses. So it covers funeral services and cemetery charges. The only thing that limits what it covers is the amount of money that you have in the trust. So for funeral services, it's the funeral homes and their services and staff, embalming, cremation, burial, even a memorial luncheon, obituaries, death certificates, flowers, transportation, opening and closing the grave, a marker, a memorial tree. Actually, that makes me think of something. I just recently learned that there's a company called Parting Stones, and they take the cremains and make them into these polished stones that you can give to family members. I thought that was really kind of interesting. And of course, burial plot, casket, or urn. One of the questions that I frequently get is, what if there's money left over in the trust after all the final expenses have been paid? Where does that money go? Well, those funds get paid to the estate of the individual in case there's a Medicaid payback. We have for our burial trust, it's a secure online portal. The groups that we have using it, we've gotten really they love this online portal because they can enter the information and have it done in less than a minute. It's very quick. When the time comes, special considerations facilitates the claims process. As I mentioned before, anybody in the circle of support can report a death. Claims are reported via phone, our website, or email. So here's the recap. The funeral home pre-need plan is a fine plan. Just be sure that it's irrevocable, and you may want to just make sure that cemetery charges are included as well. The other option that might be more convenient is the special considerations burial trust. You don't have to go to a funeral home to set it up. At time of need, you can use any funeral home or cremation provider. Is that my background noise?
Yeah, I'm checking to see if you guys aren't muted, please mute yourself. We're getting a little bit of feedback. Go ahead, Brenda.
It provides the funds at time of need. Think of it as a bucket of money. Let me go back to the bucket of money. You can pre-plan without prepaying. So if after you have a burial trust set up and you have a funeral home in mind, you can go to the funeral home and pre-plan without prepaying. If they know you're going to use their funeral home at time of need, they're more open to it. But you can pre-plan without but you don't need to do that. This is just going to, when the time comes, you can choose who you're going to work with. Again, as I said before, it's Medicaid and SSI compliant. It's spend down qualified. There's no fees, no IRS reporting. The minimum to open is 100. The maximum is somewhere around 15. Like I said, extenuating circumstances, we can go above that limit. Contributions can be made as needed. And we have the enrollment process that's super easy. And that's the recap. So what questions can I answer? Either unmute yourself if you don't want to put it in the chat. That's perfectly fine.
Hi, this is Diana.
Hi, Diana.
I've either spoken with you or someone in your company once before, and one of the things that I had been trying to do when I saw this was to have a prepaid burial arrangement all done, which is what I normally do. But the person I spoke with said basically this was more of a trust, a burial account trust than a prepaid arrangement type situation. Is that correct?
I think what you're asking, so if you would go into a funeral home and make selections, sometimes the funeral home is going to give you the option to lock in certain things, lock in the cost. if that's sort of what you're thinking about, you do want to do that at a funeral home, because again, think of this is a burial trust that does have a goods and services agreement with it, but we're not locked into anything. It's very flexible. Think of it as a bucket of money. But if there's a particular funeral home that this person wants to work with, and there's things that they know that they want, in those cases, the funeral home pre-need plan is probably the best option. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so well, I was just trying to figure out, because when I first called about this, I thought it was a good idea, but I didn't realize that it was more, or should I say, not really supposed to do a prepaid type situation where everything is put on paper and paid with a court order and all that, the way I normally do it. So I decided not to try to use the special considerations option, because I always keep trying to get everything on paper, estimates, prepaid with a court order, and done. So I don't have to go back to do something at the time I need it. But you're
So are
basically
you saying that you want to have certain things decided upon upfront and prepaid?
upfront and
And
paid upfront.
yeah, this is a bucket of money. That's the best way for me to put it. There's
Okay.
nothing in stone. Now, I have a lot of guardians that use this, and I haven't heard any of them say that they had any difficulty with um, providing the documentation for that. Um, when you do an enrollment, you will get actually a letter with our letterhead on it, and also clear points saying this is an irrevocable burial trust. This is the amount. It'll say funeral amount, but that's basically the contribution amount, and that it's irrevocable. And that has satisfied, like I said, all that I know. Maybe this is just a different way than from what you're used to doing it.
Well, in Florida, I was told that they really want everything to be prepaid. My understanding is Medicaid really isn't too fond of the burial account situation. They really want it
So
prepaid.
that almost sounds like the burial bank accounts, um, because they're kind of, it's just money sitting there. But there is a
Yeah.
goods and services agreement associated with this, so we can check that box off. Um, so I'm not sure what
Okay.
you're running into there. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just, so basically this is more of a situation where you can set up things, but you just don't pay for them.
No, you pay for them. So you can either contribute monthly to it, or if you want to, like, if you're like, I want to have $10,000 there, then you're going to either put a lump sum of money there, which a lot of the first party trust groups, that's how they do it. If you're making monthly contributions, you're only going to have what the accumulated amount is. One of the other ways I describe this is that it's like we bring the funeral home to you. You don't have to go to the funeral home. It's a pre-need burial trust that has a goods and services agreement. There's nothing locked in. There's no specific selections. Like I'm not selecting this casket and this service, because you can use it at any funeral home or cremation provider.
Okay.
So when you tell me about the ones that you've done in the past with the funeral home.
I've gone to them with a total amount that use frequently the $2,500, which is the Medicaid limit. And I try to get a cremation. I try to get, if I can get a burial, I don't. Frequently, I don't. Many of my people are not, they don't have any family members here, and they don't have enough for a plot on top of the cremation. So a lot of it is scattering the ashes. Sometimes it doesn't even get to 2,500, and maybe get up to 1,300, 1,500. But I want to go ahead and not have a burial account per se, but just get it paid for. And now I'm running into some of the funeral homes, even though they were willing to do the prepaid and get everything set up and everything is done, court orders, everything. Now they're saying that the costs may change from the time it's paid and everything is put together and the court is okay with it, to the actual time that it gets done. There may be a significant increase in costs. So now they're not even wanting to do the prepaid because they don't think it's going to cover all the costs at the time it happens. Have you run into that as well?
Well, the $2,500 limit is a limit that I've not seen. In Florida, we can go up to 15,000 for sure and go over that amount because of having that goods and services agreement. So I'm not sure where that
That's the
$2,500.
Medicaid. That's
Yeah,
the
so
Medicaid
that's,
limit.
yeah, I was gonna jump in. That's the Medicaid allows you to set aside in a bank account up to $2,500 and market burial bank account. That's what that limit
But
is.
this isn't a burial bank account.
Correct.
So that's, you should be able to go to a funeral home and set up a pre-need plan in excess of 2,500. Are you saying, Diana, that you've had
Most of these
difficulty?
people are in a nursing home under Medicaid or
Right,
in ALF under Medicaid.
right. So their monthly amount that they have to allocate towards something is low.
Low, yes,
Yeah, absolutely. So the 2,500 is the burial bank account limit.
yes.
So this is not a burial bank account. Okay, this is a burial trust with a goods and services agreement attached to it. So you can go over that limit. Now, I understand exactly what you're saying with individuals that are limited income for sure. So as far as the funeral homes go, the costs are going up, and I can see why they are coming back and saying this, but what are you going to do? So
Yeah, it's
Uh,
getting to be a problem because I don't have an unlimited amount of funds available to do this and to try to do month to month. If you want to give them the money that they're allowed, which is $50 in the ALF and 160 in the nursing home, assuming that they get Social Security versus just Medicaid, which is only $30 a month in the nursing home. It gets really complicated. So I could try this. The problem is it's going to take me forever to pay for it. And so let's say they die
most,
before I've got a funeral paid for or a cremation even paid for, and then I'm in trouble again.
yeah, are most
Hi,
of,
may I jump in? It's Chris
please,
Absolutely.
Matthews
Absolutely.
in Broward County. I'm also a funeral service professional too, so I really appreciate what you're presenting here. What I think I'm hearing is a client that is essentially indigent, and these trusts are better set up with someone before they hit that point. And because these are ones where you are saying, all right, this is the plan we want for grandma. We'd like, okay, say we'll have an essential direct cremation, but we also want a little service, and it's going to cost about $5,000. So would they go ahead and put the money into a pre-need or burial trust, and then that is taken care of because that's an irrevocable trust before someone goes into a nursing home or that kind
Yeah.
of ALF thing. But after they're in there, if you haven't set these things up, and the person doesn't have any assets, well, then you're really in the state. Then you're ending up in a county indigent issue. I believe. I mean, please
Yes.
correct me if
Yes.
I'm wrong, but that's not. So these are more wonderful vehicles to set up something that someone actually wants beforehand. If the person or the estate has the money, but also be aware that like they're saying is some of the expenses may change in that if a cemetery cost goes up, they don't have any control over that for the initial opening and closing of the casket. They may plan for, $400, but then, at time of need, it ends up being, $500, or putting in something in a website or a old fashioned newspaper that, can be monies that need to be spent at time of need, which is not going to be accounted for. Am I right on that? Does that sound like that answered some of the questions, or?
yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yes, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
I appreciate the information.
sure. Yeah, definitely. It's better to start early preparing for final expenses because when you're in a nursing home, exactly, there's not much left to set aside.
Great. Well, that's good advice. We also have some additional questions in the chat. So one of the questions Ashley wants to know, she said, so the funds can be accessed after death, but are subject to Medicaid payback. What is the time period this is allowed from death to use the funds? And who can make decisions on how the funds in the trust are spent?
So the funds in the burial trust, the trustee uses those funds specifically for that individual, for their funeral. You saw the list, the kind of so everything in the trust, while when the person passes away, we're going to get an invoice from either the cremation provider or the funeral home saying this is everything that's included, cemetery charges, everything. When that claim is closed, okay, we've paid for everything, that claim is closed. And if there is money left over, then the excess funds get paid to the individual's estate. And when it gets to the Medicaid part of it, that's out of my wheelhouse, but that's why it's set up like that. So it stays qualified for Medicaid. Those excess funds have to go back, kind of like in a first party trust.
Okay.
And no, somebody said, can you use the funds to pay legal fees? No.
So it looks like just these expenses right here, basically, is what you're looking at.
Say that again.
I was going to say not legal fees, but these type of expenses like you were just explaining.
Exactly.
And then
So
go on.
Oh, I see Ashley's question there. How does this trust organization make money to pay employees if there are no fees? So we basically do this by volume. There's only 6 of us. We cover almost the entire United States. Volume is how we do this. When the first $1,000 in the burial trust is held in a government money market, a very secure government money market. As an added layer of security, which I think is awesome, the trustee actually, to anything over $1,000, they move into a burial insurance plan. And now those funds are secure. They'll never go down. Those initial fees are paid from the growth, and the individual's account never is any lower than what they started. And then when their account's over $1,000 and it gets moved over into burial insurance, now it's secure. We're not at the amount is not exposed to market risk. And oftentimes those, depending on the person's age, there's usually a bump up in the face amount, and they do grow a little bit, kind of like a savings account. It's not huge growth. And I see Christopher has his hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to ask if it was still up from before.
Oh, was it still up from before?
Or if you had a new
Yeah.
question.
No, it was mostly up from before, but I just wanted to, really, a lot of this is stuff that, when you first become a guardian with somebody, or even right before that's the time to really put this stuff into play, as much as you may not want to, or the client may not want to discuss it, or the family, because you are not going to have choice once you start moving along. And if this is important to the person or the family, they want to be able to have some choices in how the remembrance is. Otherwise, it's going to be just a really quick direct cremation or direct burial. And also, just the other part is, if you think that a funeral home or a funeral director is going to work with, we want to do this now, but we'll pay you later. That's not going to be happening. There's got to usually be, the money has to be set up, or if you have to present a credit card, usually, because there's just too many times where with the volume, with the amount of the expense and their overhead and such, they're just not going to work with buy now, pay later plans, unless they have a third party provider, and then you really can't do that usually with a guardianship. So thank you though very much so much for this wonderful presentation though.
Were there other questions in the chat, Julie?
Yeah, there are. So Kathy, it's kind of more of a statement, but I'm going to reframe it as a question. So since they are guardians, do they need an order from the court to establish the burial trust and what they plan on using it for? Do you know,
As
Brent?
far as I have a lot of guardians, and I can't really answer that question because that's more like what your relationship is with regards to court, but we don't need any documentation. We have a lot of guardians that set these up or just contribute to their individual's account to make sure that they're that they're putting funds aside. So we don't need any paperwork.
So that would be a good disclaimer to say you guys should always be talking to your attorneys about what you want to do with your wards and checking in before you do anything major like moving money to a trust or other things. I know with aged trust, they need to have a court order to do so, to move the funds into a trust. I would say talk to your attorney and listen to what your attorney advises on the case with your ward. So do other trust companies offer burial trust, or is this unique to special considerations?
I would think that there are burial trust because it's very similar to what a funeral home uses. And ClearPoint Federal Bank and Trust is actually, they specialize in burial trust. So they work with a lot of funeral homes as well. One of the reasons that we created the special considerations burial trust is to make it a little more convenient. So you don't have to go to a funeral home to set it up. You're basically getting the same result without having to go to a funeral home. And then at time of need, you can use it at any funeral home in any state. So it makes it convenient. And we have rep payees that really like using this as well, because sometimes they are dealing with a spend down and they need to put a little money aside. And this is a great place. It's a prudent place to put money aside because we're all going to need to pay for this at some time or another. What I do know is that I think special considerations is the only one, at least that I've encountered, that we specialize in working with individuals with special needs. We actually started off in the IDD community, and then we realized that our product and what we do is relevant to first-party trust groups where somebody had a settlement because they had a terrible accident. So not just IDD, but anybody that relies on government benefits and wants to stay within the parameters and make sure that they don't jeopardize their benefits.
So we're going to circle back. One of these questions circled back to when we were talking about Medicaid. So I'm just going to read it. We've probably beaten this up, but I'll just read it. So it says, okay, so you have a burial bank account and a pre-need with a funeral home. Is Medicaid going to exempt a burial trust?
So if they have a burial bank account, what I would recommend is that we roll that into the burial trust. And what we do want to do is we want to look at the totals. So oftentimes I'll have a provider call me and say, hey, they have a life insurance policy that mom set up, and they also have a pre-need plan. Like, what could we do? And so they'll send me the documents, we'll take a look at it. But in that circumstance, I would say what we want to do is roll that burial bank account into the burial trust. If we decide we want to add to it, we're going to have to look at what the pre-need value is, and then we can decide if that combined with the burial trust, if we can put more in there, if we feel like we need that, or we just want to roll it over so that we have a convenient place and a good place. So when it comes to claim time, you don't have to deal with liquidating. You just call special considerations and they'll facilitate that process.
This is Kathy. I'm the one that asked the question or just made the statement. With the burial bank account, if I have one set up, I'm allowed to pay my attorney fees out of that after the person passes away. And if I put it all into the burial trust, I can't do that.
Correct.
So that, I mean, even though those aren't the greatest vehicle to hold money aside, when you want to get your fees paid, it would be a good thing to keep in place. So that's why I was asking about Medicaid, because you're only allowed to have so much set aside for burial, and you can have that pre-need, funeral arrangement already done, and that's irrevocable.
Right.
And
so you could do both.
You
could have the burial bank account. You could keep that open so that you can get your legal fees paid. And then also either move a portion of it or move all of, not move all of it. You want to keep some for your legal fees, but you could have both.
Okay, I just can't go over the Medicaid limit, I don't think.
Well, Now remember that if you're talking about the $2,500 limit, that's for a burial bank account. So you would leave that or less in there, and then you could have the burial trust. We would just keep that under that maximum of 15,000, which we don't really need to go that high anyway, but we would take that into consideration. Just remember, this is not a bank account.
Right.
This is a burial trust that has a goods and services agreement. That's why we can go over that 2,500.
I'm going
Gotcha.
to come back to Randy's question in a second, but Ashley asked, where did that 15,000 figure or limit come from? So since you mentioned it again, where does that limit come from?
That is most states have a limit. It's a Medicaid limit. 15,000 is the limit that Florida has for, if you look up irrevocable funeral expense trust, you're going to see that, you're going to find that limit. Almost all states are 15,000. There's probably 11 states that are between 6 and 10,000. But as you can see, looking at the average costs, even for a full-blown traditional burial, that across the board in Florida was around 13,000. What has been the average cost that you've all experienced, like with those you serve? What are you finding that most of you are paying, or what are the expenses that you're encountering for final expenses?
And feel free to come off mute if you guys want to answer that question.
Yeah, I've just had 2 people pass away, and I had already the funeral arrangements pre-done. So that was cremation, and that wasn't more than 1,200. So, and then the delivery to the family, so it wasn't terrible. And then, yeah, because, right, and then you just pay the extra cost for the death certificates, because they kind of have gone up. So it hasn't been much here in Lee County for cremations.
Right. So, think about this. If when you have a new client, if you start putting money aside for a funeral, I mean, over time, you're going to be able to at least get to that cremation limit. But
so Glenn said that for full burial and transport out of state, 15,000 plus, but
yeah,
transport out of state, that's probably got to be expensive, right?
yeah, exactly. And in Pennsylvania, which is actually where I'm located, in Pennsylvania, because we're a Commonwealth, Medicaid sets the limit per county. And like in Philadelphia and Allegheny, which is Pittsburgh, those amounts are well over 15,000. That as a Medicaid approved limit. But for the most part, we try to stay in a reasonable figure, which keeps Medicaid happy.
Now, do you happen to know, Ron was asking, is that 15,000 plus a burial bank account? Yeah, I got to your question again, Ron.
Yeah,
You asked it a
no,
second way, which is, can you have the 2,500 burial bank account and a $15,000 burial trust?
I would not. I would take that 2,500 burial bank account and then do a 13.5. I'll do my math right. A 12.5 burial trust. If we need to stay in a reasonable limit. Yeah.
Yeah. So is the trust company audited? That's one of our questions.
I'm sure all banks are audited. And so the funds are held at ClearPoint Federal Bank and Trust. So.
And then we have people commenting too, like Christopher said, transport can easily be $3,000 to $5,000 for a funeral stuff.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah,
Glenn
that's
says,
true. And it depends if the person is being buried or if they were cremated. If they're cremated, you may be able to take those cremains versus having a funeral home transport a body.
there you go. And it looks like Glenn made a comment that you may be able to have both the burial account and the trust.
Yes. And the other thing that's good to know is that burial space items are not included as a countable resource. So they're like the burial plot. I have a whole list here somewhere. My desk is a wreck, but there's a whole list of things: the burial plot, urns, vaults, those are things that are not counted as a resource.
So I have another question. I'm not gonna put it in chat. If you have somebody and there's no family member to take the body or the ashes, do the trust, is there like to get them like some burial at sea maybe, or buried somewhere? Is there
Well,
like a
whoever's making the
certificate?
arrangements at the
Well, we
time,
need guardian, obviously, but there's no one available.
the guardian, if the guardian's the only one there, they're gonna, at time, when that time comes, they're gonna be the one then saying, hey, let's decide what we're doing with these cremains. I don't know what happens in circumstances where there's very little money. I don't know what happens to the cremains. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
They can be scattered. Like I scatter most of my people that are indigent, that have no family here. The funeral home is connected with a cemetery or has an agreement with the cemetery, and they have a spot in the cemetery where you can just scatter the ashes.
Oh,
Now,
that's nice.
is there any type of naming
There
who's
is-
there? No, but there are cremations done, and it's done in a very nice way. And the ashes go back to the earth.
Yeah,
It's taken care of, but it's not their specific spot. The ashes are typically put into an area on the ground. Now, will the air, the rain, everything take them? Yes. They're not put in an actual plot. They're put in an area and scattered on the ground in a particular area. So I mean, it works. It's not the most personal, but it works for someone who doesn't have any money.
yeah.
Yeah, see here in Lee County, I need an order for burial at sea. And you don't really know that you don't have a place to put them until they pass, because whatever family was around in the beginning and are no longer around and don't want them. So you
Right.
do your best planning up front, but then come time of death, now you're holding on to ashes, and it's like, well, what do I do with these?
It looks like Monica is echoing that too. She said, get an order for scatter at sea. And
Yeah,
that should be able to help. So yeah, Monica's saying the same thing.
yeah, you can't just scatter them at sea. We need an order for
Yep.
them.
And then Richard also said there's a funeral company in North Central Florida who will scatter at sea for free when funds are not available. So it sounds
That's
like you
nice.
guys may need to connect with some funeral homes and stuff and see what they do in that situation. Monica also said, or in the ostiary, Ostuary at the cemetery.
I've heard it called the ossuary.
Ostuary?
Yeah, that's the area like Diana was describing.
Okay, so you guys could ask about the ossuary and see if that's where you can scatter some ashes. So that might be a good solution.
Yeah, is there a fee for the ossuary, or is that no? Is that the same one that's in North Central Florida, or is that a different one?
Oh, that's what the area is called, like Diana was describing, in a cemetery where you could put the ashes kind of free flowing or into the ground without a vessel, is what my understanding is.
So it sounds like you're saying, Monica, that's the term they need to talk to the funeral home about. Do you have an ossuary that we could scatter the ashes at? That's the technical.
Right, or they have, I know this doesn't sound very nice, but the cemetery told me they have a tube and that they would put the ashes, another option is put the ashes down this tube, and then it's like an underground area where others are. It's like a shared area. Yeah.
And Taylor's sharing that Brevard also has an ossuary for $50. It just kind of depends.
Did we answer Glenn's question?
I believe we did, and then Glenn later clarified himself. His later clarification, one can have a burial account and an irrevocable burial contract with the funeral home, which is earlier he was saying about the, he was saying the burial account, hold on, sorry. We got a lot of comments, so I'd have to see what that relates to, but he was just making a clarification. I believe we
Okay.
answered it. If we did not answer it, Glenn, if you want to ask again or
No,
come
you guys got it. You guys got
Perfect.
it. I was talking, I didn't know specifically about the trust. I know that the burial contract is an irrevocable trust from the funeral home. It's considered a trust, but I'm not sure about a specific trust like we're referring to today.
Okay, good clarification. And I think that's everybody. Did you guys, did anybody else have some questions or even some good resources for ways to, sounds like you guys have a lot of good resources for handling cremains when, you know, when you're left with them and have to deal with them because there's no other family around. So, but if you have more questions, feel free to come off a chat or feel free to ask it in the chat. Come off
Yeah, and
or ask it in the chat.
whoops.
Oop.
There's my contact information. I think Julie's gonna send the slides out. And you're always free to reach out to me if you'd like. And if nobody has any further questions, then I'll sign off.
And I just put your stuff in the chat. Everybody's thanking you very much. They appreciate your presentation. So thank you for coming and speaking to us about this trust. It's definitely an interesting solution. You know, like everybody's saying, for a ward that maybe has a little more money or a little more resources. But yeah, everybody's just saying thank
Sure.
you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. So thank
Wonderful.
you for
I
coming to
appreciate
present to
it.
us. And then we will send everything out to everybody like we normally do, the credits and the slides and Brenda's contact information and all that. And I'm sure if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm sure she'll be happy to be a resource and just, you know, answer your questions.
All right, so let me see if I can get myself out of this meeting. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Brenda. You have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to pause the recording because as everybody knows, we are recording.